My name is Reed Carr. I am one of the members of the workshop planning team, and I also serve on Williston's Conservation Commission, which doesn't have a lot to do with our topic tonight. But we have some other folks from other committees in town who are here, and we have many folks who are not. Some public service announcements. Reminder to turn off your cell phone ringers. Tonight's event is being broadcast and recorded on CCTV. So we're thankful for them coming and doing that tonight, but we want ringers off. There is a bathroom. It's just through that yellow door. That is not a door, the yellow archway there. And there are additional bathrooms elsewhere upstairs. Get food anytime you'd like. Just be mindful of the camera setup. And tonight we have some very generous sponsors. We want to thank Healthy Living and the Greater Burlington Industrial Corporation, who provided us with funds so that we could provide you with healthy snacks and some unhealthy snacks as well as refreshments. So a huge thank you to both of them. We also want to thank Healthy Living for welcoming us today to do a site visit. We have some members of their team in the audience. Matt is here to represent them, and they gave yes, thank you, Matt. And they gave us a lovely tour today to be able to actually start thinking about some on-the-ground examples. So thank you for that. Twin Craft Skincare is also a sponsor today, as well as the Energy and Housing Committees, and they really helped us get together with the maps and the logistics, reserving the space, writing the observer, and getting the word out. Thank you as well to our Energy and Community Development Planner, Melinda Scott, who helped us get some of those items taken care of. And finally, to Sustainable Williston, another sponsor tonight. We have a number of Sustainable Williston folks who are here volunteering. They're helping greet folks. They're doing setup and takedown. They are also doing waste warrior duties to help you as you finish with your food to make sure that we have a zero waste event tonight. Finally, I'd like to ask the planning team to raise their hand. So if you're here from the planning team, go ahead and pop your hand up so you can take a peek around. You can feel free to ask questions of any of these folks. And I just want to call out that during the planning process, I think of maybe the second or third meeting, Debbie said, this is just incredible. The planning team was so organized. Everybody showed up every time. Everybody completed everything to make tonight's event possible. And finally, I'm going to hand it off to Matt Boulanger, our Director of Planning and Zoning for Williston, who's going to make some opening remarks.
He didn't say brief, so I get to just go now. No, thanks, Reed, for having me and for involving the town in this event. And as Reed said, my name is Matt Boulanger. I'm the Planning Director for the town of Williston. When I came to work in Williston 17 years ago, I was really excited to come back to my home state of Vermont to work in the career that I had found in planning. I moved back across the country to be here. And when I was offered the job in Williston, I was really excited because it was a town where things were happening. It was a town where there was energy in the system, in a sort of a metaphorical way. There was interest on the private sector side to do things here, to build things here. And the town really had a long history of willful and careful planning to deal with that energy coming in and to try to turn it to the good. Things like having design standards, things like trying to get a mixture of affordable housing types as residential development happened, things like having complete street design or building out a bike path network, or having really good street trees and green spaces and proactive land conservation, all of those other wonderful things that Williston do. So those things were evident a long time ago in Williston, long before I knew about them, but they excited me about this place because it's a place where things are happening, and when things are happening, there's an opportunity to do good and to stretch into some interesting goals. And thermal energy networks is certainly one of those. So you've got some maps on the table. I warms my heart to see people put maps out. As a planner, people love maps, and a number of them involve this area that we're in, Taft Corners, where we recently did a whole lot of planning and a whole big revision of our zoning. such that we could be supportive of increased building height, residential density, energy efficiency, and good mixed-use design and walkability and bikeability. That was a gigantic project that was completed. We have the first few buildings in Finney Crossing that were developed under that new zoning code, just about ready for occupancy in the next couple of weeks. So you can actually see what kind of look and feel we got. And you can see that when the town responded to development pressure by asking for things like better design, more complete streets, sidewalks, bike racks in front of buildings and things like that, that those things do indeed show up here. So there are things like that I'm talking about that maybe even 17 or 20 years ago, you might have said, you know, I think we ought to require this, or I think we ought to try to encourage the private sector to bring that to Taft Corners. And someone would say, oh, you're nuts. It'll never happen. It's too complicated. It's too expensive. I think some of those things might be the kind of things you might hear about something like this when you talk about it. And I will be realistic that new development in Williston faces incredible headwinds right now, as does new development everywhere in the United States and even over the world right now. Interest rates are high, materials costs are high, labor is short and labor is expensive. The price of land hasn't gone down either. And the price of infrastructure like roads and sewer pipes has essentially doubled in the last 5 years. So when we start thinking about, wow, when all that new development comes, wouldn't it be great if it also did these other things, like maybe had shared heating resources between buildings? It might feel like a big stretch right now. But today's big stretch might be 20 years from now just the standard. We've seen that play out before. And it doesn't happen unless we start planning for it, unless we start thinking about it. And so whether it takes 2 months, 2 years, or 20 years, that's why it's so important to have these kind of conversations, and that's what long-range planning is all about, and community involvement is all about. There is a ton of potential in Williston. We recently received our recommended housing targets by the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, which was a goal set out of Act 181. Williston's high goal is over 4,000 additional dwelling units in town by the year 2050. Well, here's the thing, like you, we did the maps, and we mapped our 840-acre growth center, our form-based code area where we're requiring all that good design, and without taking a single building down, we can build 4,000 dwelling units. Infill. People say, oh, isn't it built out over there in Taft Corners? It's not. We did build on top of a few parking lots, but we noticed there's quite a lot of those, and that probably a few could be converted, but we didn't take any buildings down in that simulation, and we were looking at 4- and 5-story buildings and 3-story buildings to do that. We weren't looking at skyscrapers. So the potential is there for Williston to play a critical role in helping Vermont solve its housing shortage, in helping Vermont achieve its economic development goals, in helping the entire state and region continue to be a relevant place and do it in a way that's energy efficient, that's environmentally friendly, that doesn't consume a whole ton of land, and results in a really amazing, walkable, bikeable, pleasant to be in environment. And that's what still excites me about Williston when I get up and come to work and walk into the same building I walked into almost 17 years ago and do this every day, day in and day out. So that's my talk. Nothing's easy, nothing's free. But if you don't start dreaming about it and planning for it now, it'll definitely not happen. A friend of mine has a young son, and he said once, well, my son says, well, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kim Horning-Marcy. I'm part of the planning team and part of Sustainable Williston and a bunch of other environmental groups. And my fun task is to kind of give you all a sense of who's here. First of all, we're thrilled you're here, and it's a very diverse group, which is one of our hopes. So first, I'm going to say, raise your hand if you're working on housing. All right, look at all these wonderful people. Raise your hand if you're serving on a town committee. Look at all these. Very generous people. Raise your hand if you're on town staff. Yay, thanks for being here. If you're an elected official in town, raise it higher, raise it higher. Look at this, yay, select board. Raise your hand if, I don't think, well, do we have anyone elected at the state level? Unfortunately, our reps and senators, the legislature is really high gear right now. They all were invited, and they warned us that their committees were running late. So we'll send them the recording. Is there anyone here representing one of our federal House or senators? Look at this. We've got 2. So these are fun people to get to know. And they're very personable. Who's a business owner? No business owners? Does someone work in a local business? I know we got people working in local businesses. There we go. Okay, who's a community volunteer? Yay! Are there any teachers? Are people working in our schools? Oh, very good, very good. All right, we've got teachers here, or staff. Healthcare workers. Any healthcare workers? Okay. How many here are concerned about energy costs? I think that's about as unanimous as we can get on a topic. All right. Is anybody we missed? How about somebody who works for a denomination? All right. So anybody else? Nobody else? Okay. So I'm going to pass it. Does anyone feel I missed somebody? Oh, thank you. We do have people here representing other towns who are interested in this. If you're from another town, would you raise your hand? So I know we got St. Albans, Essex. Where are you? Shelburne, great. Any other towns I missed? Okay. Well, we're thrilled you're here. We're excited about this idea, which is working already in Canada and other parts of the U.S. I'm going to turn it over to Debbie.
Okay, so just to add to the introductions, Jared and Sam and I will be leading this workshop for you. So first, my name is Debbie New. I grew up in Burlington. I raised my family in Waitsfield, and I currently am living again in the Burlington area. And I started Vermont Community Thermal Networks to put this solution on the table about 3 years ago, and it thrills me to hear people saying thermal energy networks. Thank you, Matt, for your introduction. You've said a lot of what we want to cover tonight. And I'll just hand it quickly to Jared and then back to me.
Sure. I'm Jared Rodriguez from Community Decarbonization Partners. I represent a firm that does a lot of work with communities, existing building owners. I do regulatory and policy work, and also project origination and project development work to assist folks like you to create thermal energy networks and plan for them.
Cool, and we also have Sam here, who's far away from the microphone. So Sam Lash is also a Vermonter and used to live in Williston and was on the Williston Energy Committee, and now is working both for, I'll first say this part first, both with me and Jared on thermal energy networks, but also Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission as an energy planner. So thanks, you'll hear from Sam later. So the first thing we want to do is take a look at what everybody here shared with us about what they think about when they think about heat, and then why that matters.
Sure. So each time we do this, we see something different, right? This community says a lot about comfort and warmth. Sometimes we get communities where the entire concern is over cost, right, and rising costs. And so we didn't really see that too much here. but we saw a lot around comfort and warmth. I would say the second biggest thing after that was dependability, necessity, importance, right? Like energy is fundamental to our entire society and our economy. It's the thing that drives the economy, because you can't do anything without using energy, right? So it's the basis for our economy. And so you'd think we'd be like thinking more about it more often, since it kind of dictates our entire life, right? So we're here to kind of do that, to see heat in a different way, and to actually be able to identify opportunities out in the community for using energy in a more efficient and potentially dependable way. Yeah, so what is sharing heat, right? What do we mean by that? So throughout the community, there are a number of thermal energy resources that are either unintentionally or intentionally wasted, right? And what are some of those? Grocery stores, right? So we're cooling things down in freezers and refrigerators, and we are intentionally throwing that heat out of the roof. Bakeries and ovens, right? We heat something up and then we cool it down and we throw the heat out. Heat moves through our community in lots of different ways, right? Through cooling, right? We're taking heat away, and through heating where we're adding heat. Through industrial processes, commercial buildings, right? In your home, in multifamily buildings. We're also taking showers, right? And flushing the toilet. When the, when the water in the toilet goes down the drain, it's generally at the temperature of your house, right? It might have come in the house at a colder temperature, but it actually absorbed heat from your house. So you paid to heat the toilet. And then you flushed it. So we literally flush heat down the toilet, and it dissipates into the ground along its way to the wastewater treatment plant. And by the time it gets to the wastewater treatment plant, it still has residual heat in it that could be captured. So the fundamental basis for thermal energy networks is recovering heat, capturing heat, scavenging for heat wherever you can find it, and then sharing it between buildings and getting it to where it needs to be, when it needs to be, and sort of how it needs to be, at what temperature, right? And we could talk a little bit more about that. But that's what we're here to talk about today.
Great, so let's look at our plan for the evening. And here I chose a couple of images of Williston that maybe are familiar to you, but a lot of people think about going shopping when they come to Williston or going to a restaurant or something like that. But I wanted to acknowledge the beauty of Williston, and that is there is a lot of rural space here still. And also what I remember of Williston from when I was in middle school is, and some of you have heard me say this before, Skateland. Right? Do you remember that music? Some of those songs from the 70s, when they come on, I just say roller skating. Right? That's where I was, in Williston, yeah. But anyway, for tonight, we've already had a really wonderful welcome and also learned about who's in the room. We've talked about heat and sharing heat. So next, we're going to talk about local goals and community priorities. Then we're going to talk more about what we mean when we talk about thermal energy networks and give you a couple examples. And then we're going to focus on Williston opportunities by looking at those wonderful maps that many of you already have spent some time with. And then we'll sum it up and talk about what's next. So first, we want to talk about Williston. And some of you have already been involved quite a bit, and some maybe not so much, in Williston 2050 community engagement, new town plan, that kind of thing. It would really help us as we start talking about thermal energy networks to learn what's important to you about all of that. So we have two essential questions for us to talk about tonight. The first is, what do you feel good about that's happening in Williston now? The second is, what are your hopes for Williston? So we want to start with Williston in the present. What makes this a livable place, a place you're glad to live or work or be associated with? And then Williston in the future, what are your hopes? In other words, what changes would you like to see here? And what do you want to see stay the same? Because both can be equally important. So we're just going to take about 5 minutes for you to turn to someone next to you. You can talk in pairs or trios as you like, and just share your thoughts on both of these questions as you like, and then we'll get back together to hear what people talked about. So turn to someone near you, and you have the questions right here. I'll let you know when it's time to come back. Thank you for taking this time to talk with your neighbors. Let's see what people came up with. Let's start with what you feel good about Williston now. What did you hear from someone else, or what did you share with your neighbor? Safe community to live in. Yeah, so everybody can hear and so we can get it on the recording. I probably repeat things, but what else? Yeah. Okay, being able to have a community conversation like this for a better future. Great. Other things? Yes? Trying to prevent sprawl and having a walkable downtown. Great, yeah. Job growth. What else?
Good schools.
Good schools. Wow, that matters, yeah.
Flexibility, that we're looking at ways to solve newer problems now with the tremendous need for affordable housing and adjusting our regulations and our planning.
Okay, that's great. So flexibility in general and specifically about how to solve the housing crisis here in Williston. Thank you. What else?
Volunteerism with all the different committees and boards and town halls.
Yeah. Yeah, we saw this here when Kim invited a show of hands about who's volunteering, who's on committees and all of that. Yes. Great. What else? Planning for the future. Yeah, Matt spoke about that already. Yeah. Anything else?
Maintaining the village identity and allowing the growth to go on separate.
Yes, both. The village identity, that local character, but having the growth center. Anything else missing?
Great people.
Okay, yeah. That is important. That matters to me too. That's what I've experienced here working on this workshop with Williston people. So what about your hopes for the future here in Williston? Here we're thinking about what would you really like to see change and what would you like to see stay the same? Either one of those.
I'd like us to really push for green energy, renewables, be an example for the state
Okay.
in terms of how much you can accomplish if the community gets together to identify.
Okay, great. So the energy itself, but also being a model for the state of Vermont and showing what's possible here. Yeah, rephrasing what you said. Thank you. Other stuff? Yeah.
More affordable housing,
Mm.
especially for that missing middle.
Okay, yeah, not just low income, but middle income housing so that there can be more kinds of people who can live here in Williston.
I like what Matt said about the, how much he came here because he saw opportunity, and he's seen it change. I'd like to see a little bit faster change. I would love to see a conversation where South Burlington is saying, I want to be like those.
Oh. I'm from South Burlington. And I want to be like Williston. No, that's a great way to express it. Yeah, I am impatient for change too, in general, so I appreciate that.
Because I think we should appreciate what South Burlington has done because they actually created an unbelievably well-done downtown community.
Okay.
For many years.
So maybe something that you'd like to see change here is from learning from other communities that are doing the kinds of things you'd like to do here. Yeah.
Let's see, better architecture.
Better architecture. The kinds of buildings.
Say more. Better as in say more.
Okay, so we have better design, aesthetics, but okay. Buildings that you would like to wake up and look at every day and yeah. Appreciate. Yeah. Design you can appreciate. Anything missing? Yeah.
I'd like to see better public-private partnerships.
Okay. better public-private partnerships. We have representatives from the town, both staff and elected officials, et cetera. We don't have a lot of business owners here, so that we might want to put in our what's next category. Yeah. All right, well,
We'd like
okay.
to maintain the rural portion of the town.
Right, when you say rural, what are you thinking?
The things of the ag rural zone now, the south of the interstate and the North Williston areas.
Great, so farmland and natural landscape as well? Both of those?
And
Yeah.
the sightlines of Mansfield and Campbell's.
Sight lines, right. Yeah, the beauty of that really matters to us as Vermonters, I feel. Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, I know that Williston doesn't have a lot of ability to do this, but I'd like to see better public transportation.
Public transportation, yes, okay. Has anybody talked about a more walkable community? I think Matt was bringing that up, right? Yeah, okay. Okay, that was happening over here. So walkable community and more public transportation could really change things, could change how we live and the kinds of energy we need to use and how much things cost. Okay. Jared, are you ready? Okay, we're running out of space up here. Thank you for all your wonderful input. And now we can talk about what this might have to do with thermal energy networks.
So the theme on the what's good, I think, is there definitely seems to be capacity, right? People said that there's an openness to planning and taking action to prevent sprawl while also growing, the ability to problem solve and a willingness to change regulations in order to solve problems. I think that's really important. Some folks think that regulations sort of like fell out of the sky and that they can't be changed. You can change everything. You have control over all of it. Your schools, there's a future orientation, which I think is really important, but there's also an appreciation for and a need to maintain identity and character. I think that's also important. So in other communities that we've worked in, I think somebody said, like, why can't we just build more Vermont, right? Or build more South Royalton in our community? And that's true, right? Like, I did see some things today near where I went to get lunch that kind of don't really look like this community, right? And there is no necessarily historic root to what this community is. So I'm hearing that a little bit. So about aesthetics, right? And the desire to protect view sheds, preserve agricultural areas and rural areas, places worth caring about, right? I did hear out in the crowd, nobody said this, like, there's parking everywhere, right? And somebody also said that before. There's a lot of parking. There are a lot of surface parking lots, right? And so what does a surface parking lot do to character? Yeah, it's hard. So someone mentioned when they talked about South Burlington and what they did well, they said downtown, right? And the urbanism that they were able to implement there, faster change, but also the need for affordability, missing middle housing. I think that's a really great thing to be thinking about. So what does this have to do with thermal energy networks, right? So in order to, and this was said earlier, right? In order to plan for the future, right? And plan future infrastructure, you all have to be willing to get together and talk like this, and talk across all the different groups and stakeholders with varying ideas of what this community wants to be or what it will become, in order to identify some future where there's like agreement on it, right? Whether that's visual or physical or spiritual or anything, right? So everyone needs to kind of agree on a common vision, and I think the town plan process is actually a really great process to do that. So the other thing to think about too is like, what's missing from that existing process? So you already have a process, you already have good capacity, you have an amazing town planner. For real, like I was shocked how good. I mean, it's incredible, right? You have the capacity, so what is missing from the plan, right? And perhaps this issue is missing, right? Because we kind of always think that somebody else is going to do it. Well, someone else is going to import electricity from Canada, right? Somebody else is going to bring a pipeline in from Canada, right? Somebody else is going to deliver fuels from somewhere that probably hates us, right? So what do we do to take control? We plan, we figure out what's missing, we try to do holistic, integrated planning, and better understand that, again, energy is the basis for how this community functions. It can shape, right, depending on how you manage energy, can shape the community. So the idea that you're sharing heat, right, it means that things need to be proximal, right? They need to be close enough so that you can actually do the sharing. So that means that buildings might be close to each other, right? It means that there's a sense of urbanism emerging because you've put in the infrastructure that can support it. And then that means that you're creating a more vibrant downtown or intentional growth area or core or whatever you want to call it. So infrastructure, if it's planned well, has the power to deliver these things for you if it's tied appropriately to those other rules and regulations that you're implementing. So when you do one thing, it has an effect on another thing. So you kind of have to be thinking about all the things all at once. And I know that's hard to do, but it's not impossible. So I'll leave you with that.
Great. So let's talk about what we are talking about when we talk about thermal energy networks. This just shows you how you could access my website. I've introduced myself as part of Vermont Community Thermal Networks. And this is Jared's organization, Community Decarbonization Partners. I also want you to know we work with a variety of state and regional partners, and you'll recognize many of these organizations' names. And Vermont Energy Committees includes your Energy Committee. And we also talk with your Regional Planning Commission, and Ann Janda, who's your energy planner, who couldn't be here tonight, and the Housing Committee. Yep, lots of committees here in Williston that can be part of this, and others as well. So where we start talking about thermal energy networks in Vermont is with the obvious, that heat is a precious resource. We spend a lot of time, effort, and money trying to make heat, move it, and save as much of it as we possibly can. And what about cooling? We're going to need more of it as our climate warms, and our buildings and our towns are not well prepared for this. Well, we can have local heating and cooling by using local resources and by using ground source heat pumps, which are essentially the building blocks of thermal energy networks. And I'm guessing many of us are familiar with air source heat pumps and how they compress temperature or reject temperature in order to keep us comfortable inside. So if you have a ground source heat pump in your home, it would be that gray box in the basement. And in the winter, when you turn on your heat, it would receive temperature through water and pipes from outside the building, from the ground. And it would compress that and turn it into heat to keep you comfortable in the winter, or in the summer, the process would reverse and it would extract heat from your home and send it back through water and pipes into the ground and cool your house down. So that temperature can come from water and pipes from underground, and that's why a lot of people refer to it as geothermal energy. So we're not talking about hot rocks deep down, core of the earth, kind of Iceland thermal energy. We're talking about at about the depth of a water well, under the frost line. In Vermont, the temperature down there is about 50 degrees year-round. So we can drill down and send water and pipes down to absorb that temperature, bring it back up, send it to the ground source heat pump inside that compresses it and keeps us comfortable no matter the time of year, because it's a moderate constant temperature. And this is what it looks like. Here's a couple of heat pumps. They're those white boxes. One is on the roof of Hula in Burlington, and the other is in a basement looking a lot like a boiler. And it's also, thermal energy networks, ground source heat pump loops are also based on durable plastic pipes of various diameters, depending on what we need them to do. So these are the components. And the great thing about ground source heat pump systems, or loops, is that they can connect multiple buildings. So, you know, buildings have different heating and cooling needs at different times. So if we share heating and cooling between buildings and we start small, we can expand these systems over time, and they become even more efficient and cost effective as they grow. So this would be a thermal network. And I've talked about the energy for a thermal network coming from underground, but it can come from other places as well. And one is wastewater. Jared's already talked about that. We've talked about toilets. So moving on, there are a lot of buildings that have a lot of wastewater. And you can see here some examples. We can capture and repurpose the heat from wastewater without having to deal with the wastewater too much itself at the building, where it leaves the building, from a sewer line or from a wastewater treatment plant. And I happen to know that wastewater from Williston goes to Essex Junction. So we're going to be looking for sewer lines and a more local sources for getting that heat from wastewater here in Williston. There's also a lot of waste heat. Jared has mentioned grocery stores. Anytime we need to cool something down inside, like at an ice arena or a large building, there's going to be heat leaving through cooling towers, fans on top of buildings. We just don't see that happening. But it's there, and it can be recaptured and repurposed. So this is what it could look like in a Vermont town, perhaps in Williston. You can see the geothermal bore field is where it's been drilled underneath the town green. And then it's been recovered, and you don't even know it's there. And the grocery store is contributing waste heat from the fans on top. Of course, this is a conceptual drawing. That's not how it actually works. But all the buildings are also able to contribute the heat from their wastewater. So there are 3 sources of thermal energy going into the network and being shared among these buildings. Another source that people don't usually think of is solar, because solar energy obviously makes electricity, but it also makes a lot of heat. So if we can put coils, thermal coils, water and pipes, again, behind a solar panel, it can remove heat from the panel and make that panel more efficient. So it makes better electricity, or it's more able to make electricity, and that heat that's captured can be contributed, can be put into the network to benefit other buildings. So to review, thermal energy networks use heat that already exists across a community, has already in many cases been paid for, and would otherwise be discarded. So this is where we get to the part that is about the small piece of paper you found on your chair and the pen that goes with it. Because thermal energy networks have a lot of benefits. And I want to talk through this whole list quickly, but as I go, I would love to know what matters most to you. So this is a survey, and as you hear these benefits of thermal energy networks, if you like them all, you may check all the boxes, that's fine. But check the ones that you find most important for Williston or most appealing to you. So, here I go. So thermal energy networks are safe because there's no risk of toxic leaks or explosions. We're talking about water and pipes. They're also healthy because, clean first on the list. They're also clean, in other words, they can dramatically reduce emissions because we're using heat and water and pipes. And in fact, when they're paired with solar, you're using electricity to run the pumps, but the electricity, therefore, would be much lower emissions as well. So if you can do a thermal energy network with solar, you can get pretty close to net zero emissions. They're also healthy because nothing is burned inside, so indoor air is safer to breathe. And they're affordable. In other words, when we can manage the upfront costs, and we're going to get to that, bills can be predictable and reasonable year-round because we will always know where that energy is coming from and how much it costs to get it to various buildings. It's accessible because it's a neighborhood-scale solution. In other words, it's not up to me or you to figure out how to do this and how to afford it in your own building. It's a service that is provided, it's shared infrastructure, and you can connect to it. So it can be available to many more people across a neighborhood or in an area of town. They're also reliable because it's local energy. We know what's coming in, we know where it's coming from, we're not importing it from out of state. It's also resilient because the components are located underground or inside, which makes them much less susceptible to disruption from extreme weather events or other things that could happen to equipment that needs to be, at least in part, outside. They're also flexible because someone had mentioned the importance of local character of a downtown or a village. All of this can happen out of sight. It's not about putting solar panels on green fields, which in some cases I think we probably need to do, but there are arguments about that and discussions about aesthetics. This is all equipment that can be invisible and not part of our daily lives, but there to serve. It's also local in that when we don't have to import energy from outside, but we're using what we already have here, we can keep our energy dollars invested in our communities rather than sending them out of state or out of the country. And finally, these can be part of a just transition because whether people work on the gas system or they deliver oil and propane, they are plumbers and pipe fitters. And those are the skills that are needed in order to install and maintain these systems. So with very little retraining, people can maintain quality jobs in energy. So you may notice that there's one left on your survey at the bottom, and it's in bold because it's important. Efficient, right? So I want to just take a minute to talk about this efficiency of ground source heat pump systems and thermal energy networks because it matters in terms of our investments in them. So an air source heat pump is a really important solution for our energy transition. An air source heat pump also has to pull from outdoor air that at times can be quite cold or quite hot, which means the heat pump has to work harder and uses more electricity. In contrast, as we've already said, a ground source heat pump system uses constant moderate temperature that is much closer to where we want to get to be comfortable inside our homes. And if we're using waste heat, it can arrive at the ground source heat pumps at even higher temperatures and require that those pieces of equipment don't have to work as hard and don't use nearly as much electricity. So that's really important. The energy savings we get from this leads into cost savings. So, as I said, no fossil fuels means cost stability. High efficiency means lower operational and maintenance costs, longer lasting equipment because there's less wear and tear. Less electric use means less demand on the electric grid, which means electric bill savings across the board. Now, thermal energy networks, as we've said, are shared infrastructure, much like our water and wastewater systems. And we know how to manage these upfront costs. We do that all the time in our towns. And one way is to contract with a third party that will do a lot of the work for us, that will develop, finance, construct, and operate it. Which means that customers don't have to shoulder the upfront costs. They might pay a one-time connection fee and then pay monthly bills, so that over time, that third party can recover that investment. Now, if a municipality wants to get more involved, say in thermal energy networks, they can do this themselves, or they can do this with some help from third parties. But essentially, municipalities are eligible for low interest loans in a way that others are not. And we currently have really good tax incentives at 30 to 40% off of a system. And there are also grants that can help us get this done, which means, again, customers don't have to shoulder the upfront costs. They might pay that connection fee and then their monthly bills, which creates revenue for the town. This is not based on taxes and bonding for taxes to increase, but the customers paying their bills allows the debt to be paid over time from reasonable customer bills. So we can talk more about all of that. What that yields is a whole lot of benefits to our communities. And this is a short list of what we hear from Vermonters is most important to them. And I just want to highlight economic development, downtown revitalization, and affordable housing top the list of what we can do when we keep our energy dollars local, use less electricity, and use what we already have, which is what Vermonters know how to do really well. We have two examples to share with you, and I'm going to pass it back to Jared to do that.
Great. So it's really important to recognize that no place is static, right? There's no place that stays exactly the same, right? Unless it's, maybe a museum piece. Hopefully, right? Yeah, even they change, right? Yeah, absolutely. So no place stays the same, and it transforms over time. All cities do, right? Whether it happens in 2 months, right, or 2 years, or 20 years, all cities transform, all places transform. So how do you leverage that fact that that's gonna happen, right, in order to induce change? So you figure out what's your business as usual, like what was gonna happen anyway, and then you just tweak it just a little bit to fit the new thing in. And hopefully the incremental cost of doing that is low, and the benefits for doing it pay back that incremental cost. Right, so that's generally what we're talking about here. So what did Champlain College do? They had a bunch of existing buildings, but then they also had planned new buildings coming in for their campus. And so they had the dual task of figuring out how are they gonna minimize energy consumption for their new buildings and existing buildings and meet a climate target and eliminate fossil fuels on campus. So they used new buildings to anchor a geothermal system. And so, okay, we can build this building from scratch, we can design it with geothermal, in mind, and this building's gonna have geothermal, but incrementally, how much more would it cost if we slightly oversized it so that I can go next door and feed the existing building to take that building off of gas or fuel oil? And that's what they did. So over the course of a decade and a half, they've converted much of their campus over to a shared geothermal system or a thermal energy network. And to our knowledge, it's the first one, and if not the only one operating of its kind in the state of Vermont. It's the largest. It's definitely the largest. It's not the largest geothermal system, right, but it's the largest networked between multiple buildings thermal energy network. Really cool project, and look how long it's been operating. So the next one is completely fascinating. Also note the year, 2012. So what was happening in Iowa, in a county seat, surrounded by farmland? It's fairly urban, right? It's walkable. It's got a downtown with buildings right next to each other, lots of character, all the things that we kind of emulate, right, that we would like. Surrounded by open green space, not sprawling. We actually have places like that in America where they don't sprawl and they kind of end, and you can get everything that you need within your downtown. They were struggling coming out of the recession, really struggling. They had a lot of vacancy in their storefronts. They had abandonment. They got really hit with the mortgage crisis. And so they had economic development on their mind. They had transition, reshaping themselves into something new, and they were doing a lot of planning work to figure out what they would become, like what did the community want to become. And so simultaneously, the courthouse, which is the center of the community, the county courthouse, the boiler was gonna fail. So someone had the foresight to say, look, like we just came out of an energy crisis. Oil was $150 a barrel. Like we need to do geothermal. And I sort of dissuade people from picking a technology, but in this case, it kind of worked out. So they decided that they were going to put geothermal in the park around the courthouse, drill wells into the park, 400-foot wells. And they realized, oh, this is an opportunity because we could redo this park, right? And we could also think about what other goals we could achieve by ripping this park out and redoing it. So they also applied for additional grants to support the park, right? No connection to the geothermal, but what did that do? By stacking the incentive, they brought the cost of the geothermal down, right? Because they were gonna have to restore that park anyway. Additionally, they had money to put in an amphitheater and create a space for a farmer's market and start to activate that downtown that was struggling. So they're thinking about doing multiple things at once, right? We always have to be doing multiple things at once, right? How many things can a roll of Scotch tape do, not duct tape, sorry. So the other thing that they decided that they wanted to do was, like, we have to spruce up our downtown. We want to do complete streets and streetscapes and plant new trees, and we also have a stormwater flooding problem. So how could they combine multiple goals into one and do complete streets and influence how stormwater flows through the community? So they did these curb extensions with bioswales that absorb extra stormwater, so they're not overwhelming their existing sanitary sewer and dumping raw sewage into a nearby water body. So they were also thinking about this systemically. And so as soon as they came up with the plan to rip up all the sidewalks, they started telling the business owners, hey, we're coming in July, we're gonna rip up every sidewalk in this downtown. They had a grant to do this, a community development block grant. And the business owners were like, hey, I heard that geothermal is going in across the street, and my boiler is about to go. This is a stupid question. Could I connect to that geothermal? And someone said, why don't we look into it? So they did. And they realized that they had enough money in the grant for the courthouse to oversize the bore field so that buildings could continue connecting to this central geothermal system over time. The town itself said, we don't want any part of this. We're already doing all this crazy stuff. We're ripping up the streets. We're putting in amphitheaters. We're going to have a farmer's market. Like, this is insane. We don't want to do this. And so the businesses and residents came together and said, well, we'll do it. Will you lease us this geothermal system, and we'll pay the debt on it? You borrow, we'll pay the debt. And they started doing that. So they created a company that's member-owned. Almost every building owner and business owner in this downtown is a member, including the library, including the courthouse itself, of this company. And so this year, because they take additional customers on board, and when the customer comes on board, they pay a connection fee, this year they actually gave everybody K1s because they sent a dividend back to all the folks, all the members that were connected to the system. So this is, to my knowledge, like probably the best example of a locally controlled, locally governed, municipal, but also private, kind of like a public-private partnership, for a thermal energy network in North America. Little tiny town, you wouldn't think that they'd have the wherewithal or capacity to pull this off, but they did. And they did it back in 2012. It's mind-blowing, right? That was a long time ago. So yeah, I mean, this is where I think we're gonna wrap up, but just to drill it home.
Yeah. So we like to end this portion with where we begin, which is the heat is, of course, a precious resource, and we have the heat we need and opportunities to harness it. So we would love to hear a few questions, and we'll try to answer those, and then we have an extra portion on housing to share with you in a bit. But yeah, go ahead.
For the underground piping, are there any circulating pumps required? Is there like a minimum pressure requirement with that sort of equipment underground?
Yep, so you have a question about ancillary equipment associated with underground piping and pumping. There are multiple ways to design these systems. Some of them are central, where there's centralized pump houses. Others are decentral, where pumps are in each building or in clusters of buildings. So sort of in series versus just central pump house. And then there are other design versions of that as well.
For the example you gave us, what's the reliability and the longevity of those kinds of?
Right, so an example that somebody gave me that was pretty interesting actually. So like when you get a power outage, does your cell phone go out? Typically no, right? Well, why? It's because the tower is backed up and your phone has a battery in it. So if you centralize equipment to the extent that you can back it up. Versus if everybody has their own system, it's very difficult to back up. Yep.
So is there some reason why an individual homeowner can't use their water well as a thermal source?
Is there some reason that an individual homeowner can't use their water well as a thermal energy resource? There's a lot of nuanced answers. So you wouldn't necessarily want to use your water well to cool your house because you don't want to heat that water up because it could start carrying biological agents. Okay, so this is why we don't normally mix potable water with thermal energy systems. However, if you were going to pull heat out of it and cool it down, there's certain times of year where that could make sense, but I would be concerned about running potable water even through a heat exchanger with something else that might not be safe. So there's a lot of nuance to that question, and in some cases it's possible, in other cases it's not.
Grants wouldn't pay for all of this, I wouldn't think. The town got involved in this, it would have to be a bond vote for the money.
Yeah, so there's a whole set of sources of funding for systems like this. There are grants. There are tax incentives for municipalities, for example, that function like a grant. It's a treasury check. We'll see how long those last. But they are being paid right now. The remainder would have to be bonded. But as Debbie was mentioning, rates should reflect the debt service or at least cover the debt service on that bond. So the bonding is not taxable bonding. It should be covered by the revenue from the system. And that's the case of West Union, Iowa, where the system is basically sending lease payments to the town to cover the cost of the bond.
These payments as connection fees.
Everyone's paying for their thermal energy. They continue to pay it as if they're paying for gas or oil. So those fees are going to pay debt service.
Is there any way, is it metered in any way, or how's it measured?
Yep, so good question. So how can heat be measured, or how is it metered? There's multiple ways of doing billing. There could be a fixed portion of the bill, right? And then there could be another part of the bill that moves based on demand. You can do that with a BTU meter, which is a function of the difference in temperature that you've extracted from that supply, right? So what was the temperature coming in and what's the temperature going out and what's the flow? And that's effectively a thermal energy meter or rate that could go on top of a fixed cost. So if you look at your electric bill, for example, or your gas bill, you've got a fixed cost that's almost the same every month. There might be fluctuations seasonally, and then you've got your commodity cost, which moves up and down depending on how much you use. One more question. Yeah.
The two examples you gave, was there ever a comparison of the cost of the geothermal versus the more traditional source of energy?
Versus the alternative. So the question was, is there a cost comparison between geothermal or thermal energy network versus the alternative electrification option? Is that sort of what you're saying?
It could be natural gas, it could be oil, it could be
Okay.
whatever they were traditionally using.
Okay, so the key to answering that question is how big are you drawing the costs? Is it just for that specific decision maker, or is it for the whole system? And when are you drawing those costs? Is it upfront, or is it the total life cycle cost, which includes operating expenses and a lot of uncertainty? So life cycle cost comparisons, where you're looking at upfront cost, but then you're also running it out for 25 years and you're making assumptions, is very important to do comparisons. The difference in upfront cost obviously is super important. And then what else is it that you're comparing? So say you're putting in an all-electric system and it's an air source heat pump system, and at 0 degrees, the performance drops and it starts to use more electricity. These systems go kind of parabolic in how much electricity they use. at low temperatures. Is it just the upfront cost and the ongoing operating expense, or is it the cost of bringing all of that new electric capacity to the building and all of the new distribution in the street to support that building and all of the transmission to bring the power to that distribution, and then all of the generation that has to be firm, available 24/7 at any moment to support that peaking electricity demand while everybody else is peaking at the same time. So that's the real comparison that needs to be made. And for the one that I'm describing here, we don't have a regulatory mechanism per se to exactly do that yet, but we're working on it.
So that was a bit of a complicated answer, but we are going to be around for a while and can take that question again and also others. But I'd love to invite Sam up to talk a bit about housing. Yeah, it took us a little while to get going.
It took us a little while to get here, but I'm really, really lucky because I think most of the key points have been hit. And I'll say, thanks, Matt, you really stole my thunder. But again, hi, I'm Sam Lash. It's really nice to see so many familiar faces, and thanks for having me here. But yes, we wanted to talk a little bit about thermal energy networks and how they can help us accelerate housing development. I think for many of the reasons that Matt already talked about, sort of the federal funding landscape, just the way the market has changed in terms of material and labor over the past few years especially. I think we're seeing that challenge, we're feeling that challenge. And so now especially is a great time to be thinking about how to be strategic and how to be thinking comprehensively. And I think, we've already talked about this a fair amount tonight, sort of in looser language, but that dig once principle. So, right, if we're gonna go in and we're gonna do a project, let's take the time to think about it and how it's going to serve us in that long term. And I'll just say, Jeff, for the cost, comparing the different systems over the long term especially, and obviously it's system dependent and all of that sort of stuff, but keeping the long-term cost low for residents works really well in a thermal energy network and with ground source heat pumps compared to a lot of the other options. The upfront costs for those involved in development are going to be a little bit higher, and that's why we have to get creative of how we're going to do it. So yeah, I think, it was great to talk. Matt, you talked about the Home Act of 2023, and then the following act of it is 181, right? So we saw those housing targets for Williston come out about, was it 1,402 to 4,200 and something by 2050. And I think, again, thinking about that scale gives us a huge opportunity. So thermal energy networks are most cost effective when we have the economy of scale. So when we already have greater density and have a variety of thermal energy resources. Here's where I normally would define thermal energy resources, but we heard a lot about that already. So, right, it's refrigeration, cold storage, anything giving off waste heat that we can recover, wastewater, breweries, bakeries, right? All of these sorts of things. I will do a quick plug for the municipal toolkit that we created. A lot of hard work from a lot of people, different stakeholders across the state. So as you leave, there's some materials on the table from Vermont Community Thermal Networks. Make sure to check that out. There's a municipal toolkit. It has a bunch of fun exercises that you can do to identify those thermal energy resources in your own community. And that's actually what we're going to do next, as long as I talk not too quickly, but briefly. Anyways. So again, tends to make a lot more sense when we need to add density anyway. They really contribute to smart growth goals. Now, I'm not going to read this part of the slide to you because I'll say I was super impressed when I saw your chapter 6 of the new draft plan, where it literally says homes and smart growth. That is like, I think, is that going to stay? I hope that stays. Okay, cool. So really preaching to the choir here with Williston, right? So you really embody this. I think for our state, and when we're thinking about Williston as an example, I think the thermal energy network is really a place that you can lead. South Burlington did a great job with certain things, but you really have the opportunity and really been leading on this mixed use and having those mixtures of demand and resources that a mixed use space brings. Having the housing combined with other uses is really key, and I do think Williston is really leading there. But anyways, the thermal energy networks, I think, really can lower housing and electrification costs. Again, this is where we have to get strategic. Ooh, wow, really loud. But so it really depends, again, on the different models that Debbie was talking about earlier. So if a municipality does want to step up, or a group of community members and businesses, right, we can combine those stakeholders. We can talk to housing developers about not necessarily having to include all the heating, cooling, and hot water systems in their construction costs. We can think about doing that separately, like we do wastewater, and like we work together to do that sort of infrastructure that has to go into a space to be housing ready. So again, thinking about how both that infrastructure and the indoor equipment itself can be bundled into TEN's project costs. Again, those tax incentives, which are pretty good. The direct pay option, which is still around, which we talked about, is you gave a unique opportunity for municipalities to step up and take a bigger role in these public-private partnerships that we've been talking about tonight. So just a few examples here about how exactly they can lower housing construction costs. Again, the pipes can be incorporated into water and sewer trenches. And if we do that as part of the TENS project, then we can apply that tax incentive to the whole project, right? That whole trenching for the water and sewer lines, maybe the sidewalks that go back on top as well, right? So really, again, making comprehensive projects that allow us to do the dig once and also cover as much as possible of the project with those incentives. HVAC equipment, again, can be financed as part of the network. Again, that can incentivize developers to think about how to do this. Again, South Burlington might have the win there. Some early work on developments that were all electric, but they don't yet have a neighborhood that's all on thermal energy networks. So I challenge you there, Williston. I'll throw it down now. It's on video, so we can't go back. But yeah, and I think this is really that key part is municipalities can own and operate TENS, just as you already provide water and sewer service. And I think that's sort of a different space for energy committees and energy champions across the state, is really having to get into these conversations earlier on. And I think I would say in a lot of places that's a challenge. But I think as you see the connections with the housing committee and the energy committee and all the folks that are already in the room, that's not a challenge that you have. You already are thinking together and thinking comprehensively about these. I'm, in the interest of time, to really get to mapping, I think we're gonna sort of go beyond these and just emphasize that, again, like water and sewer systems, we know these are required for economic development. These are levers that we pull already in planning to support restaurants, to support hotels, to support additional housing, to support the kinds of things that we need, and so that people can come and live and work in our communities of all ages and from all backgrounds. And I think that the really key thing and the message here is just that thermal energy networks can be part of that same system, of that same infrastructure. And I think the really key thing is to coordinate and plan like you're already doing. So you have a great task corners plan, you have a village plan, you have a new plan coming out. What you're hearing, I think, is May 20th. So it would be very cool to hear TENS come up at that public hearing. But no, really, in all seriousness, I think the greatest opportunity here is as you're planning these mixed-use areas and working with different stakeholders about what they want and also what they can bring to these kinds of systems, it's thinking about not just how do we maybe oversize the one person that's willing, but how about the people who are a little tentative? Can they get TENS ready? Might they be willing to just put the pipe so they can interconnect? Might they be willing to think about what temperature that system is? When a system does fail, might they put an option in that gets them closer to being TENS ready? And I think having that nuance and really thinking about how we sort of support people where they are now and don't leave behind folks. Let's not be too scared about retrofitting. But how do we leverage that new to support everybody who's already here, I think is one of the most important messages that these systems can bring. I will say that now is the time I often like to pitch for the town plan, but it's very exciting to see that TENS is already mentioned in there at least twice. So pretty exciting. That's pretty stellar. And I think I'll pass it back off and see if Jared or Debbie wants to add anything. But I think the really key thing here is the mapping section and identifying and having these conversations. I'm here to answer questions, to talk more about whatever it is you want to talk about. We can talk about zoning and land use regulations and ideas of how to get tents in them. I have a few. Thank you so much for having us, and I'll hand it off so we can get to those maps.
Just one thing really quick. So folks often ask, well, why does Europe have so much? Why do they have so much more than us, right? I hear that routinely. Why do they have more district energy systems and thermal energy networks? Like, why are they doing this? And why have they done it? And why are some of their systems pretty old? And the reason is, post-World War II, when their cities were destroyed and they needed to rehouse people very quickly, they decided that they were going to put in central heating systems and heat networks to bring the cost of housing production down and to speed it up. Because if you don't have to put a boiler plant in every building, you could build the building faster. So that is the real reason why those systems are there, why there's so many of them. In Germany, right? Think about the places that saw the worst damage. That's where the heat networks are in Europe. So we can borrow some of that thinking, right? And build new, right? Or restore urbanism to places that might accommodate it and think about how this shared infrastructure can help that process. Just wanted to call that out.
So we're going to be available during the mapping time for more questions, but it is time to look at maps. We have 2 maps with part A and B of another one. This would be, can you recognize it? We have 2 village maps, yeah, the school, right? So we want to have some time to look at the village. We also have 2 maps of the Taft's Corners area, one just the plain map and the other with an overlay of what is in the town planning conversation right now for that area. So one might be easier to look at than another, but we wanted to include what Williston is already thinking about for that area. And what we're looking for when we're looking at these maps are thermal energy resources. And you've already heard a good bit about what kinds of buildings and facilities have heat and may have excess heat. So we're going to leave this up. Those pictures are from Williston. I came out here a while ago with an Efficiency Vermont person with a FLIR camera that can register heat. And you can see that there are vents on buildings in Williston in the Taft's Corners area where there's heat coming out. So we're looking for all of these kinds of buildings, including where we might have spaces for geothermal bore fields. So we're going to leave this up. We invite you to go to the maps. These are your maps to write on, draw on, circle clusters of buildings that you think would be great for a thermal energy network. We're going to be at the tables with you to answer questions and talk. And then we're going to take just a little bit of extra time tonight so that we can wrap up after we have some time at the maps with you. So if you can hang around for that, that would be great.
Yeah, Hannaford's. Exactly. So when you think about your house, think about that region. What do you want? Would this be something you'd ever be interested in connecting to?
Oh, of course, if it was available.
There are some concerns about the capacity to heat and cool that entire new structure with just air source heat pumps, depending on the height of the ceilings and the time of year and the temperature. So it would be, I think there's some tentative interest to thinking ahead about could we build it so that in the future when those air source heat pump units reach end of life, we connect to a ground source system.
Got the town green, which they said you could do boreholes in this.
I like that. Let's put some black circles for... Oh, absolutely. Let's see if I can write upside down.
Doing all this construction here, might as well.
4 holes.
Yeah. I'll do it.
You got it? Yeah. I'm trying to write upside down. This is our map of the village. Do you have anything in mind in the village that could be a source of heat or a place that needs heat?
What about all the ball fields?
Okay.
Field there, and all these extra fields there.
So yeah, if we had a system that had multiple areas with boreholes, you could have like a centralized like pump station and stuff near the school.
Borehole here.
Yeah, these are marsh areas, so can't build here.
Can't build there. I don't know if you can drill boreholes in because it's all wetlands, but we can put it in there.
Right, if it's wetlands, that's
Yeah.
great from temperature perspective.
Let's put them here close to the building.
Yeah, right. Well, that will minimize your piping distance too.
We got these. I mean, that's all.
This is the old church?
Yep. So. Municipal and school, right? So you've got all that.
Wait, what's municipal over there?
Well, I'm just saying municipal and school. Just call it all public, right?
But is there an issue with this being owned by the school district and not the town?
Well,
It's a solvable problem.
yeah, you know, so you partner through a memorandum of understanding. You know, we share use and maintenance of the rec fields. We play nice together. Sometimes
I
when
think
we
it'd
have
be a
to.
perfect start.
You know, so there's that. There's other sort of interesting things like, you know, up here is Cathedral Square, right?
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And just over here, right, is to the Commons. So there's a cluster of stuff there. There's a lot of potential for infill development throughout the village corridor under the new zoning. So there's other things that, you know, that might come in.
And then when we have enough people who are really interested and want to explore this, in other words, people who are interested parties, then we can get those people together to further define what a thermal energy network project might be, and especially how it could be owned, organized, and financed. We just touched on those things tonight, so we would dig much more deeply into those once we collect some information about what a thermal energy network project might look like here. And we can look at more than one. So, Jared, do you have anything else you want to add?
I mean, I will say there are municipalities in Vermont that are beginning to think about heat mapping as like an official exercise. Bellows Falls is one of them. They issued an RFP, and we won it, which is really cool. And so doing that thermal energy resource mapping can guide this process, but like we've kind of done a bunch of it already with you. And so I'd say if anyone is aware of a specific project that could be coming, right? Like I heard that the library might expand, right? I heard that you know, the school did get a retrofit recently, but there might be other opportunities to do additional retrofits. If there's a project that might even be 3 to 5 years out, you could kind of piggyback on that opportunity to see if you could create an anchor in a particular neighborhood. So we don't know what's happening in this community, but you do. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can share one specific example, which is if someday we decided that we wanted to take control of Route 2 strip through the village, and we wanted to bury all of the stuff that's currently on telephone poles, and we wanted to put in better pedestrian paths through the village, we could do that at the same time as installing a network.
So just to conclude the evening, I want to hand it to Ellie. Thank you for being here. Just a couple of final words, if you want.
I had a little spiel, but I'll cut it down to the points that I had to talk about. First, thank you guys. Thank you everyone for coming. A big thank you to Debbie and Jared and the rest of the
wherever Sam is.
and the rest of the planning committee. Thank you to our sponsors. It really took everyone to make this event happen tonight. I think a big takeaway is that this is not the end of the conversation, it's the beginning. There's a lot more we can do. It's really exciting that we have a community that is really engaged and forward-looking, and I think this event has been really wonderful, and it's great to see everyone out here tonight talking about what we can be and how we can be a more equitable, resilient, and livable Williston. Thank you all.